The ongoing battle over religious liberties in Bulloch County. The school board has another meeting coming up December 19th in Statesboro. What happens next is the big question. What will happen at that meeting? We'll try to get answers to that right now. Jeremy Dice joins us once again from Liberty Institute with the ongoing legal battle now when it comes to the Board of Education in Bulloch County fighting for religious liberty. Jeremy, thank you so much for stopping by once again.
Thanks for having me, Bill.
Well, the board's directive in asking teachers to remove Scripture from their email system, that is the big source of contention. It looks like they have decided to go that route where when it comes to the email signatures, nobody writes anything, whether it's religious or non-religious. What is your reaction to that?
Well, that's exactly what they've done here. They've chosen to say that we don't want to have any First Amendment expression in email signatures at all, let alone religious or secular expression whatsoever. And the board is frankly entitled to do that. There are three categories that when it comes to speech that school districts have to abide by. There are some times when the school has to regulate speech. There are times when they may regulate speech, but they're not required to. And there are times when they're not permitted to regulate whatsoever. Email signatures fall within that middle category, that they may regulate it, but they don't have to. You know, I think it's unfortunate the board has chosen to go the route and do what they didn't have to do, and that is to completely close this forum whatsoever, not allow anybody to quote from Lou Holtz or the Apostle Paul. We're big grown-up people in this country. We're allowed to have a great debate, and that extends even to our email signatures so often. So it's an unnecessary move. I can understand why they would have made it, but the broader question here is whether or not religious liberty has been advanced. And I think from the broader letter that the Board of Education has put out based upon what the people of Bulloch County said last week, I think religious liberty is on the uptick right now. We're going to continue to monitor this situation, but I think the people have spoken eloquently and well about helping to advance religious liberty and provide as many protections, therefore, as possible within the school system.
No, well, you said you're going to be monitoring the situation and continuing to do so. There has been reports, I think it was the Statesboro Herald, where they wrote that, quote, that you're still investigating other issues related to this and monitoring the entire situation. Should we read anything into that, or what's your reaction to that?
What we need to read into that is just the fact that the board has had a checkered past now in responding to groups like the Americans United for Separation of Church and State, so they've got a proven track record of wanting to suppress religious liberty when they don't have to. And so what we want to make sure we do now is to empower the citizens of Bulloch County to say, hey, well, you've got a friend on your side. If you are concerned that the religious liberty of your citizens, of your teachers, of your students is being compromised, give us a call. We want to make sure that we're able to defend that right. We have had other reports of groups, student groups that have had some question marks raised. It looks like those have been privately put to rest as well. So I think, again, it just is speaking that the people in Bulloch County spoke eloquently last week in favor of providing as much religious liberty as possible to the students and teachers in Bulloch County schools. And the Board of Education is taking maybe small steps, but they're taking steps nonetheless towards increasing religious liberty for all the students in Bulloch County.
Who's going to be the decision makers about appropriate religious expression in Bulloch County? We've got Jeremy Dice of Liberty Institute to explain. One of the things that concerns me, and like you said, you're going to monitor the entire situation, see how this plays out. But one of the things that the board wrote in response to your letter, they said religious items are permitted in the classroom as long as they are an example of religious heritage and non-proselytizing. And they said guidance will be provided by the Board of Education. And that language right there is going to be widely interpreted. I mean, is having a cross considered proselytizing? So I guess when we're talking about monitoring the situation to see what happens, it looks like those are the kinds of things that people are going to be aware of.
That's right, and the board is going to be, look, I think the entire community right now is just kind of skittish of the entire thing. They've had some interference with the Americans United for Separation of Church and State. The board's capitulated to them. Now the community stands up as a whole, and we're able to come in defense of a couple teachers and students in this way, and they've kind of backed off of a few things. But what we're experiencing right now is what the Supreme Court has warned about when the schools decide to get involved, or the school boards rather, get involved in over-regulating speech and religious liberty in the school system. One court, the Keishian Court, in a couple of years ago, said that when one must guess what conduct or utterance may lose him his position, one necessarily will steer far wider of the unlawful zone. In other words, if the teachers aren't aware of where the line stands, and there's just this big cloud hanging over people's heads right now about whether or not they're able to engage in religious liberty or not, they're just going to stay away from that zone entirely. But I think what the board did, and let's not lose sight of this, I want to give them at least some credit on this whole thing, by sending out the letter and an email to all the teachers and staff throughout the district, articulating when their religious liberty is good and solid, and at times they need to be more careful. I think that was a wise move on their part and a good move on their part. At least they're beginning. I don't think they're there yet, but I think they're beginning to carefully articulate the parameters that are permissible in terms of religious liberty when you're a teacher at school. It's a little bit of a different animal than it is for everyday citizens walking around the community. Teachers certainly have religious liberty rights, but they are also teachers and have to abide by certain restrictions on that as well. So, again, I think the school board has done a wise move to continue to move in the direction of increasing religious liberty, but we want to make sure that we stand here and make sure that the First Amendment is given enough breathing room, as the court has said, to be able to have people have their rights defended and protected.
What's the best course of action for Georgia citizens to raise awareness when it comes to religious liberty? Let's find out from Jeremy Dice of Liberty Institute. I wanted to give a shout-out here to Jonathan Cook with Bulloch County Citizens Concern for Religious Liberties. He has really organized a lot of people on Facebook in Statesboro and surrounding counties, and he is in the process right now to talking with several elected officials who feel like they want to jump in and do something and maybe possibly pass any legislation. Is there any advice you could give him and his people as far as what can we do now? How can we raise awareness? Are there any ideas that you have since you've been in many of these kinds of battles all over the country?
I would say two things. Number one, citizens need to remember that we are the government and that you have the opportunity to continue the momentum that you started in Bulloch County, to continue to press back against an agenda that says that you have to have your religious liberty preserved within the four walls of your church. That's not what the Founding Fathers articulated. The Founding Fathers wanted to give you, as citizens and Americans, the right to live, to learn, and to do business according to your faith. And so I would continue to urge the citizens of Bulloch County to continue this momentum and take it directly to the State House if necessary. And secondly, as they go to the State House, I would encourage the lawmakers to consider important legislation that we see being used to protect religious liberty throughout the country. Things like a Religious Freedom Restoration Act on the state level is a very vital entity to make sure we are able to keep state and local governments in check when it comes to the religious liberty of its citizens. Or things perhaps like a Religious Viewpoint Anti-Discrimination Act that codifies the very broad jurisprudence that is out there when it comes to student religious liberty within the school system. So there are many things that can be done with that. I'm happy to talk with lawmakers and concerned citizens, and Liberty Institute would be pleased to testify if necessary at the legislature about how we go forward and continue to strengthen religious liberty for all citizens of Georgia, but specifically for the teachers and students as well.
Before I let you go here, Jeremy, there's one small point I wanted to bring up, and it was something that you just mentioned here a minute or two ago. And this is a language that seems to be changing. And anytime you hear somebody say the freedom of worship, be very aware, because they're trying to make the distinction between the freedom of worship and the freedom of religion. And maybe you can touch upon that before I let you go here.
That's exactly right. There seems to be a trend that is changing the way that we talk about the First Amendment and limiting First Amendment freedoms to certain forums. Religious liberty, as the Founding Fathers articulated, it was not something that we would do on a Sunday morning within a small building. No, that was something that they wanted to see for us to be able to live out our entire lives, our worldview within the world that we live in all the time, so that we would be able to encourage one another with different worldviews towards seeking what would be the ultimate truth of things. And so they articulated the First Amendment as a way that people would be able to have the right to a full panoply of religious liberty, a liberty given to us, as the Declaration of Independence reminds us, given to us by God, not government, and therefore it is incumbent upon its citizens to make sure that we defend those rights carefully and thoroughly. And so when you hear people encouraging you to express your freedom of worship, remind them politely and kindly that is not simply the right to worship. That's something we get to do individually and collectively at times, But the ability to engage in religious liberty is much more broad than that, and it extends to every aspect of our lives. The ability to live, to learn, and to do business according to one's faith is what the founding fathers of this country wanted, and it's what Liberty Institute is dedicating to restoring across this country.
LibertyInstitute.org. Check it out. Also, they have a fan page on Facebook, Jeremy Dice with Liberty Institute. Thank you so much for stopping by South Georgia, and thanks for all you've done here in the last couple of weeks. It's been quite a ride for sure.
Indeed. My pleasure. Thanks a lot.